This is the last Quijote Talk this semester, but I wanted to just mention that our students have put together a symposium on art, politics, and narrative under the title We Tell Ourselves Stories that will take place here on May 4th and 5th, Friday and Saturday, including writers Lucy Ives, Maza Mengista, Yasmin El-Rashidi, Candace Hopkins, Lena Munzer, Adam Schatz, and others. I think it's going to be extraordinary. You can find all the details about the times on our website. Tonight we have writer and curator Omar Berrada on ways of witnessing. Omar is the director of Dar Mahmoud, a library and artist residency in Marrakesh. Previously, he organized public programs at the Centre Pompidou, hosted shows on French National Radio, ran Tangiers International Book Salon, and co-directed Dubai's Global Art Forum. His poetry has been published in Wave Composition, Seedlings, and the University of California Book of North African Literature. He recently edited The Africans, a book on migration and racial politics in Morocco. And he has co-translated into French books by Jalal Toufik, The Withdrawal of Tradition Following the Missing Disaster, and Stanley Cavell. That was Senses of Walden. Yeah. He's currently living in New York, where he teaches at the Cooper Union and is organizing the upcoming 154 Forum for the Contemporary African Art Fair, May 4th to 6th at Pioneer Works in Brooklyn. Please welcome Omar Berrada.
So we'll say some words and show some images. I'm happy that you're all here. I'm recognizing some friends, and there are also faces I don't know, which is always good. I may have too many words and possibly also too many images. So if I was told initially I could speak for 45 minutes to an hour, that maybe what I'll do, if it's too long, you just stop me and we continue in a more informal way. The idea for this talk, so I kind of tried to bring together a few things I've been interested in particular in terms of contemporary art. And contemporary art is from North Africa. I am from Morocco. And the idea for this talk kind of came from the conjunction of two things. One is a line from a novel by Ahmed Bouhnani, who is the person you're seeing here. He's a Moroccan writer and filmmaker born in 1938 and who died in 2011. And the line is in this book of his called L'Hôpital, the hospital, coming out in English soon from New Directions. This is an edition of the book that I did a few years ago. It had been published a while ago and gone out of print. And the line says, "Are we really a people? Sommes-nous vraiment un peuple?" The other element is the opening seconds, if I can get them, from a video by Bouchra Khalili called The Tempest Society. I'll read the lines that were in the subtitles, and it's three different voices speaking and continuing each other's sentence. And it says, "From where do we start? From the beginning, from the three of us. Do you mean each of us, or us as a group? We do not know yet if we are a group. We only know that we want to tell something together. We can start with a story, and telling it will say what we are." My idea is to try and speak about Morocco and North Africa, both, say, in the 1960s, more or less in the aftermath of independence or formal decolonization, and today. We've had a moment in time after the long colonial night, as they called it, where there was a lot of hope of cultural revival and a lot of interesting cultural production, which I'll say a word about, that was then kind of repressed violently by authoritarian regimes. And in the current situation, maybe I'm seeing some kind of a parallel that I'm not articulating completely, but with a kind of new revival that we've seen in terms of the Arab Spring, for instance, and the kind of cultural production around it, and that preceded it as well, that announced it in a way, and the way that's going now, and also the interest of this generation that's been working in the 90s and the 2000s in the work of those predecessors like Ahmed Bouanani, people from the independence period. Also, I've been rereading some John Berger recently, so that may show. I am obsessed with an image. It's a recurring image. I have seen it many times. I saw it again recently in Rabat. It's an assembly of people, a group of individuals facing the Moroccan parliament. Citizens standing in front of the building, like they might stand in front of a mirror. This happens often, very often. This portion of Boulevard Mohammed V, facing the parliament, is one of the most popular sites for protests and sit-ins in the country. Hence, it was odd for me to realize the other day when I was looking for images that there are very few pictures of this scene online. And part of this talk is about documentation and the absence of it. There are people there almost every day a different group, every day an unmet demand. John Berger writes that mass demonstrations are rehearsals for revolution. They are also, more modestly perhaps, a reminder of the possibility of revolution, a reminder that we are visible to each other. We demonstrate in order to manifest ourselves, and I'm using manifest also because in French to demonstrate is manifester, so there's this kind of bodily thing to it. They are standing in front of a mirror, but they do not recognize their image. The mirror is silent. The building is unmoved. The facade is literally made of marble. Again, in French, you say that someone or something is de marbre, of marble, means it remains emotionless in the face of something. In cinema, those who do not have a reflection in the mirror are called vampires. They are sometimes called the undead or the living dead. Their ontological status, their existence as subjects, is uncertain. The political status of this crowd is suspended to the appearance of their image in the parliamentary mirror. The image that will perhaps make them full citizens, that will help them no longer be subjected masses, but a mass of subjects, of political subjects. In other words, to become actors in their own lives and in the lives of their communities. They are suspended to the apparition of an image, their image, or at least of representatives in their image, the missing image that might make out of their gathering a people, a political body. But the picture will not appear. The political representatives are absent. As you can see, it's a pretty empty place in there, or busy with more important tasks. The police in general, on the other hand, are there. So the scene repeats itself, a repetition without difference, a kind of tragic routine. Who cares? The people is missing. And you may have noticed I'm having trouble with language here because in Arabic, as well as in French and other languages, the people as a collectivity is a grammatical singular. الشعب يريد, like the anthem from the Arab Spring, الشعب يريد إسقاط النظام, the people wants. And in a way, that was a major speech act of the Arab uprisings. Through it, a collective will took shape, and it was used, everywhere. In English, it's the people want. The people is plural. I mean, even in Spanish, el pueblo unido jamás será vencido. It's singular. So in English, it seems to be a collection of individuals that refuses being subsumed into a collectivity. What that suggests about the possibility and meaning of popular uprising in this country, I would not venture to speculate. I don't really know. So perhaps the very function of the state apparatus is to ensure that the image remain missing, to make the people and the history of the people disappear vis-a-vis itself. Perhaps one of the functions of art, again a hypothesis, is to fashion spaces of popular visibility or re-visibility. And the re is important you'll probably understand in some of the things I'll say later, strategies of re-editing, remontage, retelling, recasting, etc. So the first artist I'd like to talk about is Nidhal Chamekh. He's a young Tunisian artist. He works primarily in drawing. In 2010, when the uprisings in Tunis started, he was a 25-year-old man in Tunis taking part in the demonstrations. And the question for him was how to capture this visually, the demonstrations themselves, the political moment, his own feelings, etc. So he would kind of step out of the demonstration from time to time and take his sketchbook and draw, figures, a character, a situation, an impression. And later in his studio, he would then include these motifs transformed and these characters in composite drawings that reflected his experience and in which the popular political experience is put in relation with elements of memory, of reflection, motifs from art history, scientific or anatomical drawings, excerpts from poems and songs. It kind of brought back to me Wordsworth's famous definition of poetry in his preface to the Lyrical Ballads. It says, "Poetry is the spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. It takes its origin from emotion recollected in tranquility." So it's like this interesting contradiction between powerful overflow of powerful feelings and then the recollection in tranquility. So there's the powerful feelings of the demonstration, and then there's the kind of collage that's done later. So the result is a series of 12 drawings, or drawn assemblages or collages, titled "What Do Martyrs Dream Of?" In this and in the subsequent series, "The Flapping of the Wings," the elements of the drawing seem to float in the space of the page or the sheet. The drawing is a catalogue of traces, a palimpsest of visions. The leaf is a democratic space of apparitions. The drawing, an echo chamber where hands imitate wings, and an egg, a hot air balloon, or a heart looks like a grenade. The components never resolve into a unified whole. The work makes a case for incompleteness. Beyond the elements as such, the drawings seek the right space between them. One that allows beings and things to become visible to each other, to illuminate each other before our eyes, to bear witness to each other, a bit like the protagonists in Bouchra Khalili's video initially that responded to each other. I should just make a note about this link between testimony and martyrdom, which exists in Arabic. It's always been obvious to me, but it also exists in Greek, apparently. Martyr derives from the Greek word martur, which becomes marturos and martures. Its essential meaning is witness. The expression was used in Greek courts. Until the 2nd century AD, it did not mean dying for a cause. With the appearance of that new meaning, the old sense of bearing witness in a court gradually became blurred and gave way to the new meaning. So Arabic also has, and still retains this conjunction actually, shahada, it's shahid and shahid, so it's not the same word, but it's the same root. And both senses are still current, and also shahada is also to watch, like a viewer, somebody who's watching a movie, is also, it's in the same category of the witness and the martyr. Some more images. The largest exhibition of Nidhal Chamekh's work to date took place in Tunis in September 2016. The artist chose Neme as a title for it. Again, Greek and Arabic. Phonic serendipity has it that the term meneme, which refers in Greek to memory, sounds like meneme, and especially in Tunisian, meneme, which refers in Arabic to dream. The works of Nidhal Chamekh seem to want to turn this chance into necessity, proposing a vision of history in which Greek memory and Arabic dream come together, in which memory is history shaped by the labor of dreaming. The hand that draws, seizing memory, does not act as a simplifying filter or an instrument of synthesis. On the contrary, it is a force of unbinding, an institution of differences, an injection of gaps and enigmas into the social body of history. As it attempts to catch a memory, it makes it slip into the dream realm. What the drawing catches, ultimately, is the fleeting, teeming character of memory. To look at the image is to enter a dream populated by ghosts. Nidhal Chamekh's drawings are ghost reunions in the same way as one speaks of family reunions, a feeling of comfort on the verge of breakdown or breakup. Freud writes, "A dream is a rebus, or a picture puzzle. Our predecessors have made the mistake of treating it as a drawing." In a certain way, Chamekh's drawings are rebuses in which the visual unconscious of Tunisian modernity unfolds, its dreamt revolutions, its repressed revenants. Any representation here must be understood in the theatrical sense. The page is a bare stage on which the dream scene is performed. A theater of the collective unconscious in which we see ourselves being seen. Eyes stare at us, breaking the fourth wall. If the series titled "What Do Martyrs Dream Of" had its origins in the desire to document the Tunisian revolution as it was unfolding, Nidhal Chamekh is more generally interested in the history of struggles for democracy in Tunisia, even before. For instance, he has looked at the 1984 bread riots in Tunis. Many such riots took place in the early 80s across North Africa and beyond as a response to hikes in the price of essential goods, bread, which came as a result of strict austerity measures, policies imposed by the International Monetary Fund on many third world countries. These riots were very severely repressed, and documentation of this repression is even more rare than documentation of what I was talking about earlier. It was efficiently confiscated and hidden from view. There were 9 bread riots in Morocco, in Casablanca in 1981, and one can find very, very, very few people, very few pictures of them, and when you see the pictures, you understand why they may have been taken away. So this is demonstrations that were protesting rises in the price of bread. Nidhal Chamekh's parents were activists in the 70s and 80s. He had access to some private documentation around the riots. 3 poses of Fadel Sassi is a triptych made from snapshots documenting 3 isolated moments in the fall of an activist who was just shot in the heart during the bread riots. First, the artist made these 3 large format drawings, and these are drawn using burnt bread powder. And so he explained to me, you can't do it, you have to use some kind of a little sponge and dip it in the ashes and then try and do the drawings. These are fairly large scale. And then a second similar work is this screen printed triptych it's made using glue and again burnt bread. So it's like the image is pixelized, there's the concentration of glue accounts for the darker and the lighter parts. The image is literally born from the ashes of its own subject in a way. Bread dust produces a very grainy image. The developing agent is paradoxically an obstruction grid, a blurring instrument. But by troubling the photograph, I would say it reinserts it in a latency. It reopens its potential of appearance. The image is a dream waiting to be dreamed. In the 1970s, John Berger made a series of drawings of his dead father in his coffin. In doing so, he records a unique moment, the intensity of seeing for the last time. A photograph is evidence of an encounter between event and photographer. A drawing, I'm quoting Berger, a drawing slowly questions an event's appearance, and in so doing reminds us that appearances are always a construction with a history. For Berger, a photograph is static because it has stopped time. A drawing, or painting, is static because it encompasses time. In its slowness of execution, a drawing contains the experience of looking. It commands the viewer to linger, to enter its temporality. Of the past they document, archival photographs provide an arrested state. The move to drawing and other methods of revealing the image can be read as an attempt to deform the moment of arrest. I've stopped quoting Berger a while ago, so sorry if I'm trying to channel. So, to deform the moment of arrest, to unfold the compressed time in the photograph, to give back some time to history, to extract from a buried past a possible future, to resurrect the revolution. Resurrection is a word that's very present in the language of 1960s writers and artists in North Africa. This is an important poetry book by Mohammed Khairuddin, Resurrection of the Wild Flowers, inscribed to Ahmed Bou'nani, who I was mentioning earlier. The word resurrection, or the verb associated to it, appears 12 times in the 100 pages of The Hospital, the novella I was telling you about earlier, so that's a lot of occurrences. Kateb Yassin, who was one of the main writers around the time of struggle and independence in Algeria, has this kind of, his work is permeated by the desire to make ruins flower anew. There's always ruins and new flowering. L'Hôpital, the Ahmed Bou'nani novella, is the fictionalized account of a lived moment, a long stay, several months, in a hospital for tuberculosis. This was in the 60s. Very early into the novella, we understand that this is no ordinary hospital, that it may be closer to a prison. The patients are abandoned by all, the state, the medical staff, their families. There's no one to witness the patient's plight, and there is no world beyond the hospital gates. There are only two modes of escape, which the narrator uses alternately. One, traveling into one's own memory, childhood, and two, going towards the group of other patients, speaking with them, sharing stories and dreams and fears across personal taste, personality types, social and economic backgrounds. Toward the beginning of the book, the narrator asks, "Sommes-nous vraiment un peuple? Are we really a people?" In a way, the whole novel is a performative answer to that question. Page after page, a people takes shape amongst the abandoned, destitute republic of hospital inmates. This happens in full recognition that all hope has been abandoned. After all, the first sentence of the novel is, "When I walked through the large iron gate of the hospital, I must have been still alive." At least that's what I believed, since I could smell on my skin the scents of a city that I would never see again. The novel takes place in a post-mortem present. Kateb Yassin, his famous novel Nejma, echoes this. In a passage, a character named Rashid is reflecting on the ruins of the two cities between which he has lived his life, and then he reflects on other meanings of ruins, and he says, not the remains of the Romans, not that kind of ruins, where the soul of the multitudes has only time to waste away, engraving their farewell in the rock, but the ruins watermarked from all time, the ruins steeped in the blood of our veins, the ruins we carry in secret without ever finding the place or the time suitable for seeing them, the inestimable ruins of the present. So in a way, he's saying that living amid ruins has become not a topographical reality, but an existential condition. It has contaminated time even. The present is uninhabitable. One must look elsewhere. In the same context, a lot of the books that were coming out in that period had to do with digging. So the present is uninhabitable, so you have to dig, you have to look elsewhere, the past, etc. You have to... The archaeological turn in art started in North Africa way before the current contemporary art craze. I just wanted to show you some book covers, but we'll go over them quickly. So what these writers were confronted with was a kind of cultural silence that was brought about by the years of colonization. Not quite cultural death, since, as Frantz Fanon pointed out, the aim sought was rather a continued agony than a total disappearance of the colonized culture. What a whole generation was left with was a present in ruins. To quote a poem by Bouhchichi, "Of the things I loved the most, I want to keep my memory intact. The places, the names, the actions, our voices. A song is born. Was it a song? Of the things I loved the most, I want to keep my memory intact. But suddenly, places get confused with other places, names slip one by one to their deaths." The word memory is probably the most frequent one in Bouhchichi's writings, even in his titles, Mémoire 14, Le voleur de mémoire, Loin de la mémoire, Il pleut dans la mémoire, etc. And it's a memory that's always threatened to fall into silence, to become mute, and silence is probably the second most frequent word. And another line from one of his poems, "Mute memory has no testament." Or in The Hospital, this protagonist speaks of his stubborn memories that refuse to be reassembled. Or, "Only our silence will grow, fatten, swell like a mountain." In the early 60s, Bouhchichi traveled around Morocco to document traditional popular culture in all its fast receding forms. And in the Atlas Mountains, he visited a tribe, the Ait Bouhgamaz. And this was part of a kind of an institute that was doing cultural documentation. And he says, we were equipped in 16mm cameras. We were doing investigations on makeup, costumes, dances, etc. And we would discover things as we went. And so they go to the Ait Bouhgamaz, and he says, once we were with the Ait Bouhgamaz tribe, the men were dancing in circles. We asked them why they were dancing in circles. And they said that it was Mazel who had asked them to do so. Jean Mazel was a French anthropologist who was a guy who organized the first festival of folklore in Marrakesh. And he had asked the Ait Bouhgamaz to dance in circles because that worked well with his theories on solar dances. Now, that's all fine, we're not surprised, but they did dance in circles. That's the tragic part. All the memories are open, but the wind has carried away the words, but the streams have carried away the words. We are left with strange words, a strange alphabet that would be astonished to behold a camel. This is Bouhchichi again, in a poem called The Illiterate Man. We are left with strange words, or we are strangers to our own words. Our language has become a maze in which we cannot find our way. And l'hôpital is made out of long, winding sentences, artfully laden with commas that turn them into a kind of textual maze that is not always easy to negotiate. Metaphors of the labyrinth and the forest abound. Are we really a people? Not sure. But we must defend something we recognize as our tradition against its very traditionalization, against its folklorization, its primitivization, exoticization, its freezing in time. I'll just pass over a couple of things. Katib Yassin, whom I quoted before, says or writes, "In the shadow of a father murdered before I ever saw the light of day, I felt like a piece of broken pottery, an insignificant fragment from an age-old architecture." So there came about this conception of modernity in the 60s over there as the rememberment of the salvaged fragments of a tradition that was running the risk of what you could call death by folklore in a way. And this was done by writers and also by visual artists, and they kind of worked together. There were some famous instances of collaboration. For instance, a journal called Souffle, which was started in Morocco, but was a kind of North African and then became a kind of global South journal. They translated text from Latin America. It was kind of a part of the tricontinental dream of the time. Mohamed Melehi, the painter who made this beautiful poster, said in 1967, "I discovered that one cannot import modernism. The rehabilitation of our own values was more vital and more urgent. And for me, modernism is situated precisely in this rehabilitation." Who worked a lot with Berber symbols, and he, at age 28, was asked to come direct the School of Fine Arts in Casablanca in 1962. And one of the first things he did was kind of change the curriculum, get rid of the French curriculum and its separations of high art and low art and and craft and all of that, and made a curriculum that might resemble much more something like the Bauhaus, where the frontiers between those things are not as clear, and where the students had to go on study trips to study kind of instances of vernacular architecture, decoration, and craft all around the country. And they did a whole work of documentation in the magazine of the school that was called Maghreb Art. It was short-lived, only had 3 issues, but it did some important work in its modest way. And that went along with the work that Bouhnani was doing with this institution he was working with called the enact, National Institute for Traditional Arts and Theater. And during those trips where he would see tribes dancing in circles because they met the wrong anthropologists, he would also kind of make drawings, like this is drawings he made of traditional jewelry that he saw, many things like this, like just a process of documentation that was done for the institution, which was a very tiny institution, but that was also done for his own personal documentation, with the idea that that the new art that we need to make must come from piecing together what we had and what we're maybe losing. I wanted to show you an excerpt from one of his films, but I don't think we have time. So as I was saying earlier, all of this work, so there was this kind of energy for a number of years, and it was censored and repressed fairly soon after. The Soufl, the magazine I told you about, was started in 1966. It was banned in 1972. And some of the people who wrote in it were put in jail. And that was kind of the beginning of the end of that particular phase of cultural history. But as I was saying also earlier, there's a younger generation of artists that has been examining that heritage. One of the cases, or one of the artists I'm interested in this context is Bouchra Khalili. So I showed you an excerpt earlier from a film called The Tempest Society, which was shown in Documenta last year. There's another film she made earlier called Foreign Office, which looks at the period during which Algiers was dubbed the Mecca of revolutionaries. As you may or may not know, in the late 60s, all the kind of revolutionary movements of Africa and many other places had headquarters in Algiers. The Black Panther Party had an office in Algiers. And what one of the things that Bouchra Khalili realized in going to Algiers was that this history, which is fairly recent, was entirely forgotten by the younger generation of Algerians. So there were people she would meet who were in their 60s or 70s who had lived through that period and who are nostalgic of that period. But she realized that the kind of national narrative that was imposed by the independent state later kind of ended national history in 1962. That is, at the glorious moment of obtaining independence from the French after 132 years of colonization. But all of the other moments, the kind of revolutionary history of the independent state, had been erased. So in a way, at the beginning of this film, A Foreign Office, in the same way as those writers and artists in the 60s were doing a kind of work of inventory, Ahmed Bouhnani going to the countryside and drawing all the different kinds of traditional jewelry he could find, documenting all the dances and everything, documented all the kinds of, like painted tiles or whatever you can think of for use in the teaching of art. she does something kind of similar in the beginning of the film. So I'm not going to show it, but you see a map of Algiers, like a map of the city, and you have these two hands, these two characters, the protagonists, the young protagonists of the film, who are kind of placing dots on the map and naming the different revolutionary movements that had their headquarters here and there. So it's a kind of inventory and a kind of spatial inventory of the situation. And then there's an inventory by pictures, so all the kind of figures of that moment in Algiers, and he too visited us, etc. So it's a kind of reappropriation of their own history by these two characters. Let's not go to the excerpt. I can show it to you later if you're interested. But the question is, what are the remains with which we can tell the story? We can retell the story and reflect on its transmission and build our own. And how to make history resonate with the present time. And so to go back to the earlier film, the Tempest Society, that particular film works in kind of a similar way. It's shot in Athens, and it's partly in Greek, but the story it tells, or the story it... Bouchra Khalili just arrived. I think I'm going to skip this part. I've said enough. I just got blocked on that now. Let's see, what are we going to do? Well... sorry.
Oh, I'm sorry.
I don't know. I guess I could just say a few of the words I have here. It was just, I wanted to make parallel between the two films in the sense of this question of how to make history resonate with the present time. And the question of how bodies intervene in the film. So this film, The Tempest Society, talks about this theater troupe, Al-Asifa, The Tempest, that was a theater troupe that was mainly run by North African immigrant workers in France in the 70s, and that was kind of bringing their own lives and struggles onto the stage and onto the street. And so the film is shot in Athens, and it is, in a way, the three characters I spoke about earlier, and the way they tell that story, and the way in which they integrate in it their own story and the story of their own moment. Athens today, Paris then. In the video excerpt I wanted to show, but as I said, the manipulation would take too long. You hear Paris 1972, 1978, Athens 2016. What happened in the meantime? What happened before? The struggle here and elsewhere, yesterday and today. We'll talk with words, with pictures and sounds. We will speak for ourselves and for those who cannot speak. And those who can speak for themselves will join us on the stage. So the kind of politics of these films seems to me to be, their ambition seems to be anchored in specific bodies and a specific choreography of bodies and in voices. Much of Khalili's work shows a body that says I, or a person that says I, but this I, in a way, contains multitudes. The protagonist speaks for themselves and for others. There is a complex as I said, choreography throughout the film. Sometimes they are facing us, sometimes they are facing each other, sometimes they are shot from the back, watching something. There is a scene in which they are holding other faces to their own faces, like masks of the original protagonists of Al-Asifa troupe, literally bearing someone else's face. So there are continuous shifts in the positions of the speaker. Bouchra, who is here and who can speak about it much better, sums this up into a concept called, from Pasolini's work, the notion of free indirect discourse. And the question, when someone speaks, who is speaking? Exactly. This is an aesthetic as well as an ethical question. How do you speak with someone? Can you speak for someone, on behalf of someone? How do you quote someone? Who is the author of what is being heard? Etc. And for me, Bouchra's work is an exploration of the different ways people are moved to speak and to allow others to speak. And just in this same context, some of Bouchra's work registers the fact that people who might be censored or unheeded are in fact political subjects. And she gives them a platform, or rather a frame, as in a filmic frame, to speak in their own words. I'm thinking of her series of speeches and also of the Mapping Journey project. These are one person or one voice videos in a way, usually one person recounting their trajectory of migration or of political engagement or of precluded citizenship. And to quote something she told me in an interview, in speeches, chapter 2 and 3, each text, so these are videos in which you see somebody, as I said, telling something. And she calls them texts, what they say. So each text is the result of numerous conversations I had with the protagonist that speaks it. The process could last several weeks. I never used a voice recorder. I would faithfully transcribe our conversations as they happened, like a scribe. Then I would go back to the individuals concerned with a written version, and it might go on like that for days or weeks. Then, once they were satisfied, they memorized and recited the text they had written without writing it. It's their text, literally, but this is the process. Since Bouchra is here, actually I should keep speaking about Bouchra, because then she can answer questions at the end, and then she can hit me on the head if I say something wrong. I could mention, I have some images. I could mention the Mapping Journey project, which many of you must have seen. It was shown at MoMA last year, I think. It was shown previously in an exhibition at the New Museum. So it's been seen in New York. You may recognize this is from the MoMA install, and this is a different install of it. It's an 8-channel video installation. Each of the screens is a projected map, 8 squares of intricate light with variable dimensions, at least in certain of the installs. I saw it in many different places. In each video, a refugee or a migrant describes his or her journey in the most factual fashion and draws his or her route on the map. You only see the hand that traces the trajectory. You never see a face. The close-ups here are on the voices. They are speaking in French, Arabic, English, Italian. They are laden with accents that recall their origins, even as they bear traces of their journey. We are asked to look, and above all, to listen, to bear witness to peculiar stories that are otherwise never heard, stories that global geostrategy ignores. The intimacy of the voice you're hearing brings about empathy, but no sentimentality. Giving a voice to the voiceless often boils down to speaking on their behalf. Bouchra Khalili does just the opposite. She carves a space that makes it possible for them to speak. Then she listens. By inscribing this path on the map, so as when you look at the videos, each of them, they're from 3 minutes to maybe 8 minutes or so, each of them. And at the beginning, you see just the map, this kind of cold image, usually centered around the Mediterranean, though there is one that is in Palestine. And what you see is this hand kind of drawing lines, drawing a trajectory. I went here and I went there, and then I had to stop here and I had to go back there, and so you get these lines that get marked on the map as the video goes. By inscribing this path on the map, they reclaim the forced trajectory as their own. They make it indisputable. They free it from imposed political boundaries. They imbue it with the thickness of lived experience. The instrument of power that is the map suddenly appears as an instrument, a possible instrument of emancipation. In Bouchra Khalili's attendant work, the series of 8 silkscreen prints titled Constellations, so these are the trajectories that they were drawing on the map. So in these constellations, the underlying political map is deleted. Only the migrant trajectories remain, like shooting stars in the darkened sky of world politics, like talismanic signs from a borderless future. The Mapping Journey project is often described as a work on migration. Of course it is, but but as Bouchra would say, it is above all a work about the uninhabitable present I was talking about earlier, or rather a work about how these people, these subjects, invent ways to inhabit our uninhabitable present. If you read this work retrospectively in light of Bouchra's later work, more recent works, a historical and gestural continuity becomes evident, a continuity of gestures and strategies of resistance and survival. And the notion of constellation returns like a motif now in her work, most notably at the end of the Tempest Society, the film I mentioned earlier. The constellation is presented as a kind of response. I showed you the beginning when they say, are we a group? How do we constitute ourselves as a group? Maybe we tell a story and we'll see what we are. At the end, the form that the collectivity takes, that the missing people takes, is the form of a constellation. And the constellation is presented as a kind of political proposition. It's a set of paths drawn between discrete entities. It suggests possible unity outside of any authoritarian narrative. It's a figure of equality also. It preserves individualities and at the same time acknowledges the precariousness of the community as a constellation of tenuous strands. The constellation also has to do with the logic of editing. This comes in the interview that I did with Bouchra. When you edit a video, you start with elements that may have nothing to do with each other, but then if you invent the right connections, they begin to interact. Borders can also be interior borders. Borders of race and class, for instance, of gender. A few years ago, in a large panoramic exhibition of contemporary Moroccan art, I was struck by a work by an artist named Bouhchichi. It was this work. I don't have the frame, but the frame was also white and the inside was white. Everything was white. And it represented this shape chiseled into white rubber inside a white frame. And it was titled, "The Invention of the Machine Liberated the Blacks." The machine in question was an early threshing machine used in the US around the time when slavery was abolished. So it's kind of surprising to see that work there. It really stood out in the context of these works. And so I tried to know more. I didn't really know the artist. I had seen maybe a few of his works before. He used to do abstract, very colorful kind of abstract painting. And that didn't seem to bear any, explicit traces of politics. I did not know he was black. So he's a man in his early 40s from the southeast of Morocco, Amazigh, Berber, artist, teacher of art, black. And when I contacted him to try and know more, because I was researching the question of race in Morocco, he told me that he had basically, of course he knew before, but in the last 4 years, he had really realized he was black. And this has to do with stories of contemporary migration across the Mediterranean, or of precluded migration across the Mediterranean, because nowadays European countries and the European Union are basically outsourcing to North African countries the guarding of their borders. And so a lot of people coming from various places in West Africa and elsewhere can end up getting stuck on the northern shores of Africa, and then they end up staying. And now there's this new phenomenon of Morocco becoming, for instance, a kind of destination country. And so the kind of there is this weird phenomenon by which these people are called the Africans, because as you all know, we are Scandinavians, and there are all these kind of reconfigurations of how North Africans see themselves, where they see themselves, how do they identify and disidentify. And so Mbarak was telling me, so in the last couple of years now, when people, and so basically there's been a kind of erasure of the possibility that you can be Moroccan and black, which is incredible because you can. but so Mbarak, who had been living in the small town where he lived for 15 years, said in the last couple of years now, when people run into me in the street, they spontaneously address me in French because they think I just arrived from Bamako. What was interesting to me in this, apart from the fact of it, is the way for him it had to reconfigure the way he was thinking about his art and the way he was making art and what he was thinking about in the making of art. So this is what this came from. Bouhchichi once told me a haunting tale from Tinghir, a small town in the southeast of Morocco. It is the story of a khammas, a sharecropper, nicknamed Kizit, who had vowed to remain celibate. When asked for his reasons, he had only one answer. Sharecropper, son of a sharecropper, grandson of a sharecropper, I am putting an end to this lineage. Etymology is hesitant when it comes to the harratin. The term may describe a function, Arabic harratin, landowners, land workers, a legal state, Arabic hortani, freed slave or second order free man, or a skin color, in Amazigh ahardan, is a dark color. In the Draa region, a strict social and economic order has long subordinated the black harratin to other groups, and until recently banned them from land ownership. They toil on the properties of white landlords for 1/5 of the yield. So the copper surface is 1/5 of the rest of the metal surface. Over time, the harratin have developed advanced methods of agriculture and water management. Their story is one of persistence in the face of discrimination and recalcitrant land. Bouhchichi translates this into stark shapes. For instance, un cinquième, a series of oxidized metal rectangles, each symbolizing a plot of land, of which 1/5 is cut out and covered in copper. The initial rectangles are identical, but the cut-out fifths all have different shapes. In the face of unchanging oppression, resistance takes singular forms. Out of a context of injustice and looming death, Bouhchichi's project produces an array of visual affirmations, a becoming visible of minoritized existences, and this is in the form of sculpture. And I'm interested in how sculpture can listen to politics in a way. One such existence is that of Mbarak bin Zida, 1925-1973, a black peasant poet from Tata in the southeast of Morocco, who occupies a remarkable position within the field of ahwash. Ahwash is a form of oral poetry that is accompanied by music and dance and often practiced in the context of poetic battles. By insisting on exposing social and ethnic inequities, bin Zida created a poetic dissonance within the ahwash tradition, which usually steers clear of explicit politics. By putting silenced realities into carefully crafted words, he uncovered a rich field of socio-aesthetic possibility. Let's just go a little further down. by shedding new light on activities and patterns traditionally associated with blacks in the Moroccan south, Bouhchichi symbolically unsettles the existing divisions of space and labor. He samples social observations and converts them into physical forms. This could be called a kind of conceptual materialism. His work displays a belief in matter, earth, soil, wood, metal, a belief that matter and its quality of presence and its shape-shiftiness holds a potential for redemption. Les Poètes de la Terre, which was the name of his recent exhibition, The Poets of Earth, or The Poets of Soil, brings together soil, agriculture, metallurgy, craft, and poetry, protest, and world-making. It relies on a crude aesthetics that keeps it close to the earth. His work stages an interplay between the physical and the intangible. The very word terre refers both to material soil and emotional land, refuses the neat division between materiality and affect. It is through this subtle wavering that Bouhchichi is able to open up the question of representation. The objects he makes aim less at explicit social commentary than at being implicit portraits of a people. And I'll just skip the text and just mention this, this is his own sculptural portrait of Mbark Benzida. Of course, we have strictly no image of Benzida, the poet he is referring to. All these histories are erased, and so for him, Benzida offered a kind of model of liberation, and he's a predecessor, but also a companion, an ally in the struggle for self-affirmation, a witness to Bouhchichi's witnessing of a people and a culture. So he felt compelled to make his portrait, for one, and make many of them, though they're all looking at the wall, and also to inscribe his verse, his poetry. You can't really see very well, but on these wood and metal rods. So it's like this power of stabilization and fixation and inscription, but on something that could be kind of like the rod of the itinerant poet in a way. So I will just move towards the conclusion. I was going to speak about Omar Berrada, but she didn't come, so we don't have to. You can just see some images. I didn't get actually to put, the thing, my computer started completely doing strange things, so I didn't get all the images. It stops here, but there were many more. They're nice to look at though. I was kind of trying to make a parallel that was, to me, an unexpected parallel between the work of Mbark Bouhchichi and hers, around the notion of, well, one of the notions is seriality, because he, as you saw in what I did, so everything he's been making has been series of things. So there's kind of, and in this work, and many other works, this image that I showed also comes in many different exemplars. And I think it has to do with a kind of reference to modernist seriality, but also a kind of interest in craft and the differences in repetition that you get in craft. And Omar Berrada, and I'll just say one thing, which is go see her exhibition at Pace Gallery on 57th Street. It's great, and you'll see for yourselves. But her, she has also been interested in the question of craft and reuse and seriality, repetition, and modernist motifs, and in the question of craft. Very recently, she's been doing a lot of embroidery and weaving, and for me, it's kind of maybe the question of the artist positioning themselves as an apprentice rather than a demiurge in a way, right? Like learning craft from someone else, learning something immemorial in a way, or learning actually with somebody. And so from that, I wanted to come back to Mbark Bouhchichi and talk about some of his work, because he's been, so the form that his work has taken since his discovery of being black has been to go towards black communities, in specifically black regions of Morocco, to see how, because he lives in an urban space, and so to go in sort of kind of more isolated spaces and see how things are. and realized that there was still social segregation, spatial segregation in certain instances, but also segregation in terms of division of labor, and realized that, for instance, in a town called Tamgrut, near Zagora, all the people who did craft, who worked with their hands, were black. So we did an exhibition together called Black Hands, where one of the things he did was just spend time with the potters there, learn from them, become one of them, learn to do what they did. And also he came back with molds of the insides of their hands. So he had these casts of the insides of their hands that we showed, and he also made drawings of those insides of hands, etc. So this notion of apprenticeship. And to come back to the poet, I mentioned Benzida, like the father figure in Katib Yassin, Yassin's Nejma, a father murdered before I ever saw the light of day. Benzida died young and left few traces, faint furrows in barren soil. They have barely reached out of his native territory and onto national consciousness. His distant voice has no face, hence Bouhchichi's desire to sculpt the poet's bust and to sculpt it repeatedly. In order to build your future, you must literally recognize your past and recognize yourself in it. Generally speaking, this work expresses a need for body, for giving body, giving tangible substance to fading legend, etching memory into matter. And this is the work with the sticks I showed. So these works appropriate traditional symbols of immortal. So this was another work. So these works seem to be saying, I am here, I am still here. In his poem Digging, Seamus Heaney remembers his father's and grandfather's ability to work the soil, to handle a spade. Quote, but I've no spade to follow them, to follow men like them. Between my finger and my thumb, the squat pen rests. I'll dig with it. Heaney takes stock of an irremediable generational break between poetry and soil, yet resolves to find his own way, as a poet, of honoring the ancestors' memory. Bouhchichi locates a poetry of earth in the under-acknowledged black cultures and crafts of the Draa Valley, and wonders to what extent his art can bear witness to these long-despised modes of living and making. His point is not so much to dig with his own tools, as it is to dig up the forgotten elders and learn about them and from them, and perchance make art. To quote yet another poet, and these are a lot of male poets I've been quoting, and I apologize. According to Mallarmé, a writer bears the duty of recreating everything out of reminiscences. Many of the works I spoke about are meditations on the traces left by events, on what remains of past struggles. For Nidhal Chamekh, for instance, what remains is an image as undeniable as it is elusive, like a dream that is withdrawing. If we cannot perpetuate it, we must record its withdrawal. And here, this should have been accompanied by images, and I don't have them here because they disappeared. There's only one that remains at the end. An archival image, so he has some works that he's been looking for archival images, these disappeared archival images of those bread riots and all of that. And so he's showing one of them in his exhibition. He burns one of them. He shows one of them on the back. I'll just read the text because it may describe better. An archival image, burned, documents its own destruction. Photographs are exhibited backwards, showing only their captions. It is only by approaching the wall, looking sideways, that one can distinguish an uncertain image as though reflected in a deforming mirror. It is kind of a negative vampire. We can see the reflection in the mirror while the object itself is absent. In this withdrawal, there emerges a form of resistance of memory, an alternative mode of appearance. We are the children of a dream too old and too heavy to die in silence. Nidhal Chamekh made drawing the foundation of his work, but in the exhibition I spoke about, Neme, there were also three-dimensional things. It had birds, plants, seeds, sculptures, some everyday objects, as though to occupy something other than the walls, or to better contaminate through art the spaces of life, and vice versa. But the birds are stuffed, the flower is dried, the photos are burned. Ghostly appearances take place against the backdrop of ruins. The gallery hosted suffocated lives, forms born out of their own degradation. It is as if the artist were giving death in the hope that resurrection might follow. As with the grandmother's kilim, so he has a little carpet, like a small cutout of a carpet that belonged to his grandmother, and he's showing it right next to a map, a colonial map of Tunisia with all the tribes marked. The French used to make these marks. And so they're the same size, one next to the other, but the kilim is burnt. He kind of burnt it partially before he showed it. As with the grandmother's kilim coupled with the colonial map of Tunisian tribes, it sometimes happens that burning one's heritage appears as the only way to make it meaningful, to save it from a conservatism that stifles it. Burning, but not annihilating. As with the triptych based on bread ashes, it is important to interrupt the burning process before its end to preserve traces of life in the aftermath of its very destruction. Despite appearances to the contrary, these works are about bearing witness to possible futures, to the possibility of a future. They are about believing in ghosts, about making room for the ghosts to return. Death here is imperfect because life has not said its last word. Forms that seem petrified are not fixed. In fact, they are fighting against their own immobility. We may have broken legs, still we walk. Thank you. I mean, in a way, like, all that I've been talking about is how to try and look inside the corpse of one's dead culture, right? Or dying, or, almost dead culture. So it's like it's a collective autopsy, and it's also the autopsy of a collective, right? If you could do an autopsy of a whole people, the plural singular, a shab, right? What could you come up with, right? Could you reassemble something from the entrails? I don't know. I guess so. So I suppose that some of the work I've spoken about has put forth the idea that you can only build your future if you are able to bear witness to your past in whatever form it is, and that bearing witness to the past in order, and it's broken, and it's so. The bearing witness to the past is the inventory that I spoke about is a form of autopsy, right? Like, what is it that remains? What is it that happened? Who was the French anthropologist who asked them to dance in circles? What are the conditions that have led, or the circumstances that have led to the present condition of the culture, right? Post-colonization and all that, or post-dictatorship. Later on. So I guess there is this work of inventorying, self-ethnography. It took the form of self-ethnography a lot, at least in the artists I've been interested in, of those from the 60s. And so you could call that a form of autopsy, maybe, as witnessing of the culture. And then, then the second step, which maybe forensic doctors don't do, is what can you save of it? What can you actually resurrect? And what can you make with the pieces, right? With the broken pieces today and for tomorrow. So that would be my answer. The other thing that comes to me is I'm thinking of this this picture of dead Che Guevara that was circulated everywhere to prove that he died. It's like a kind of propaganda picture with a dead body, and I think I get this from John Berger also, but the picture, he's surrounded by three guys, and they're looking, one of them is pointing at the wound or something. I mean, they're there. When I was looking at the Nidhal Chamekh's triptych of the activist who was shot and who's falling, who dies, there's nobody else on the picture. It's like even their death was lonely, without witnesses, without actual witnesses. Was it? Sorry? It was a photographer, yes. For sure. That's what I said, it's death but not annihilation. There is a margin, which is why we're here. Hard to say that there is a direct link, but obviously, I mean, when I hear you talk about créolité, créolisation, creoleness, creolization, and the notion of something that might be a fixed notion or identity and something that is inscribed more in a becoming, it definitely makes me think of the way that Ahmed Bouhchichi spoke about tradition, or about what he called les arts populaires, or les arts traditionnels, traditional arts or popular arts, that our vision of them, or at least the vision of them that I grew up with in Morocco in the 80s, was that those were, kind of things of the past, that they were set in stone, that they were completely reified, and they were not interesting to a young person, right? They belonged to a different world. We wanted something else. And that's kind of the vision that was passed down to us, in spite of all the work that Bouhchichi and all the others did in the 60s, which is why I was saying it was kind of covered up. The whole thing was covered up. The coffin was closed. It was done. It was over. While they were exactly lamenting this vision of tradition. And he would explicitly say, the patrimoine, the heritage, is not something fixed. It changes every day. It changes every day because it is the expression of the people, and not of the people as a kind of eternal idea of the people bearing a flag. It's the people seen from below. It's the people as an extreme living diversity of cultural expressions, basically. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these parallels absolutely exist, and I'm just kind of repeating and rephrasing because I'm told that for the recording, since you don't have mics, but simply the question of bearing witness to the past or to the revolutionary potential of the past in order to construct a future, and the parallel between these conceptions of tradition in North Africa and what Pasolini did at the beginning of his career, which is to inventory again and collect and publish vernacular poetry in Friulano and in dialect languages of Italian dialects. Yeah, absolutely. Those artists I was speaking about who were doing that archaeological work, as it were, they were also working collectively, right? And they were working collectively across disciplines. For instance, the journal I mentioned, Souffle, it was started by poets, but it was always the poets with the artists. One of the artists I showed, Melehi, would design all the covers of the magazine and would write in it. It would be interdisciplinary inside, essays, poetry, art, literature, whatever you can think of, translations. It became more and more political as years went by, so there was that kind of activistic content in it, so they became not quite affiliated, but kind of associated to certain political movements and parties. So I think there was a force of the collective across expected social and disciplinary boundaries. It's hard to say, and I think obviously those kinds of collectives were deemed dangerous and they were banned after a while. It's hard. I would need to research. I would be very curious to know, how many subscribers they had, how much, what kind of presence that achieved exactly on the ground. I know that they realized there were some limitations to their work because this was started in 1966, 10 years after the independence of Morocco, 4 years after the independence of Algeria. it was one of the limits was that it was done in French. And so one of their anthems, like one of their main goals was, we have achieved formal decolonization, political decolonization. We are independent nations, but now we have to get to work because we need to achieve cultural decolonization. Our minds are still very much kind of, we need to do this archaeological work and this reinvention work. And is there any way for us to do it in the language of the former colonizer? How do you, culturally decolonize in the language of the colonizer? So, I mean, it's a vexed question. Volumes and volumes have been written about it, but one of the things that they ended up doing, partly because of that and partly in order to reach a wider audience, was to start introducing Arabic into the journal. So they would include text in Arabic, and they would try bilingual editions, and they started Anfas to go with Souf, like an Arabic edition. And those things also changed the dynamic of what they were publishing. I mean, obviously, that means if you start publishing also in Arabic, that means that you're introducing further other people into your collective. They're bringing other ideas, they're bringing other points of reference. And so I don't know if like a group of artists and writers and contributors and editors and readers makes a people, and what kind of people it makes. But it's a start. I'm done. I don't know about you guys.